Welcome to a night at the movies. This is a new foray that we are getting into here, a brand new podcast with myself, Paul Miller. I'm a professor at Central Penn College. I'm also a communications media and instructional technology PhD student at IUP. So I'm very much looking forward to sharing with you some of the things that I've learned, but also some of the impressions that I made, but really just talking about movies here on the podcast. And of course, I'm so lucky to be joined by one of my favorite people in the entire world, Leslie Heimbaugh. Leslie, welcome to the show, A Night at the Movies.
Thank you. You're one of mine too. This is an honor for me.
Well, I got to tell you, so where this came from was I've been looking for a long time to kind of do something a little outside. You know, I'm on a few podcasts. I produce several more, and I wanted to do something that's a little bit more sort of just fun, not necessarily something for work or you know, things that I'm doing to help out other people. I wanted to just do something that I thought was interesting and unique, and this was sort of the idea that we came up with. And Leslie is our film correspondent at the college. We do something called the CPC Film Series, and we've been doing it for 3 years now, which is really insane that when you think back. I've had the fortune to actually be a part of the film series twice. I presented The Big Lebowski back in 2018, and actually it might have been 2019 now that I think about it. But I also had the chance to present a documentary that I did. So one of the classes that I was a part of at IUP was a production class where we shot our own documentary, and I actually got to chronicle the Central Penn Knights baseball season and their untimely ending of the season due to the pandemic. So I do have a little bit of a background, at least in that regard, but I do teach a lot of other classes here at the college about film, and I'm looking forward to a big class. We're going to do some documentary filmmaking over the summer. So that's a little bit about my background. Leslie, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, I'm the development officer at Perry County Literacy Council up in Newport, Perry County. We do mostly adult education and workforce training. People get their GEDs from us. So it's a job I absolutely love, and I'm here getting a bachelor's degree so that I can be a bigger support for the agency. There's more things I can do with a bachelor's and more funds that I can get paid out of. So the hopes is that eventually I'll become the executive director at the agency. But there's going to be some transition that'll happen between now and then. But I'm pretty excited about the opportunity. So, and I'm a mother of 4 kids, very wonderful, successful kids, and I have a beautiful husband and 2 doggies and a cat.
How did you get involved in movies, though? So, I mean, obviously, you know, you are a communication student, but I wouldn't say necessarily that, you know, there's a lot of film discussion. I mean, we have a couple of classes. Certainly, you know, our survey classes talk at least somewhat about film. And, of course, we are going to do the documentary class. But other than that, there's not really a whole lot of film classes. I know we do have another, like, film selected topics in film class that I know that you took as well. Yeah. But beyond that, it's not like your love for cinema necessarily came through, you know, Central Penn. Tell us a little bit about maybe some of the background and how film is involved in your life.
Well, it's interesting because as a child, we lived in rural Perry County. My dad was superintendent at Little Buffalo State Park, and we got 0 television stations. And my dad and his friend would have a couple of beers, and they'd walk around the property with an antenna. Finally, they found a place where we could get 1 station. So TV was really a novelty to me, and I'm a very visual learner. So I, you know, sat slack-jawed in front of the TV for many, many hours because I just was so taken by it. So lo and behold, my uncle was stationed in Germany in the Air Force, and he came home from Germany right around the time that people were really collecting VHS tapes. And he had hundreds of bootleg movies, basically. And they stayed with us for a month and a half until their new place was ready. They were going to move to like Minnesota or something like that. So that summer, we had just gotten out of school. There was my uncle. There were hundreds of movies sitting at my house. And I'm telling you, I did my chores and then I ran right down there and watched movies. And I had never seen a horror film before. And Friday the 13th was one of them. And I'd never seen anything that was adult content. And he had a couple of those. And I was like, whoa. And
Culture shock.
yeah, I'm probably not exaggerating to say that I watched like 150 movies in just that summer alone. And then my cousins also had a music collection to die for. And we played, if we weren't watching movies, we were listening to music. So it was one of the best summers of my entire life.
Well, what we're going to do here is we're going to do a once monthly podcast. It's going to release hopefully around whatever the first weekday of the week is, the first week of every month. So we're going to be doing this, hopefully into the future. If it is, maybe just this year, hey, we're going to get as far as we can. But that is our intention to try to come out with these once a month. And we've got a lot of great ideas. I'll just sort of preface by saying I know Leslie and I are both major Quentin Tarantino fans. We're both big Chris Nolan fans. So sort of the next batch of podcasts that we do are going to focus on those two gentlemen. But of course, in the future, we'd also mention maybe doing a horror film podcast. So we're going to try to think of some different ways, maybe even later on in the year, take a look at some of the films that hopefully are coming out this summer.
Yeah.
As we sit here and record this. So I think that we have some things that we can definitely talk about, and I think we've got enough love about film that we're going to be able to share. And maybe even after you're done with your documentary over the summer, maybe you walk us through that and we can kind of share and talk a little bit more about documentary films.
I would love that. I'd also love to do a guilty pleasures movie, because there's movies that we shouldn't love that we do, that maybe even go against things we believe, but we just can't help loving something about that movie.
So what our topic is today is we really want to start at the beginning. We want to talk about how it was that we got into movies in the first place. And so you kind of already kicked it off, and I'm going to share with you some of the things and some of the reasons why I got into film. This always kind of, when I was thinking about this, it's sort of sad, and I hate to start off our podcast with sort of a sad memory, but and this, I hope that I'm doing and bringing the appropriate facts, but these are the facts as I remember them. My mom, who I'm very close with, I'm an only child, so I do have two stepbrother and sister, who I'm very, very close with them, but I've been an only child, and I was an only child, so they didn't even come into my life till I was about 15. And my mom had a really good friend from high school. They were best friends in high school. And her name was Tracy. And I was obviously very close with her. My mom had me when she was 21. So they were still very, very close at that point. Tracy ended up at a very young age coming down with Huntington's disease. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. And over the years, she had lost a lot of friends. She got to the point where she was unable to work. And so she basically ended up having to, unfortunately, move back in with her mother, and unfortunately wasn't able to really do a whole lot. But my mom, the wonderful person that she is, we would go to the movies every Saturday. And I remember from as far back as, my gosh, obviously when I was a really little kid, she got a babysitter. I stayed with my grandma. But once, I got to the point where I was in school, we would go see, obviously they wouldn't go see like rated R movies with me, what I mean? They weren't taking me to see Friday the 13th when I was 5. But we would always go see like PG-13 type movies. And, I just remember that. And it's just so sad because as I think back about this experience, Tracy, was such a wonderful person, and it's just sad that it got to the point where so many of our other friends just didn't pay her any mind.
Aww.
And the fact that my mom was able to continue to, and she lived all the way out in, gosh, I don't even know like the best way to explain it. But if you would go all the way out Walnut Bottom Road in Carlisle,
Yeah.
like almost like you're going out to sort of Laurel Lake area,
Yes.
Dickinson Township maybe is the best
Yeah.
way to describe it. Anyway, she lived all the way out there, and we lived in Carlisle, so we would go obviously all the way out to her house. We would go to the movies, and then we would go to lunch, and then take her home. But when I think about how I first started getting into movies, like there's no way I can't bring that up.
Yeah.
And I lived at a place in Carlisle very close to the movie theater, which is the movie theater in Carlisle, which is right by the Walmart there.
Yeah.
And I could walk from a very young age just through Thornwald Park to the movies. It would take me less than 10 minutes to walk there. So even as a young, I wouldn't even call myself a young adult, even when I get, 12 to my early teens, it was never a thing in the summertime for when we were off school for me to walk to a Wednesday matinee, $2.
Oh, I know.
Back then, the matinees were $2. And my mom would let me walk to the theater, and I'd walk home through Thornwald Park, and I'd be home in 10 minutes. And I just remember, Leslie, I've always been a collector of odd things, which really drives my wife nuts. But I still have all of my ticket stubs.
Oh my gosh, that's so sweet.
All of them. Well, I'm sure I've misplaced some over the years, but anytime, and now you really don't get ticket stubs anymore. But back then I have all my old ticket stubs. But to sort of kick this off, to think about how I got started in movies, it was spending time with my mom and her friend Tracy, and getting to, help at least bring the final years of her life. That was something that she knew every week that she could look forward to, and love movies ever since. So that's really kind of how I got into to being interested in film. Yeah. So tell us a little bit more. So you started watching the VHS tapes.
Yeah.
What about actually going to the theater?
Well, we had a theater in Ickesburg in Perry County. It was called the Highway Theater. I don't have any idea why, but it had a bowling alley in the basement, and so we would go watch Disney movies when they'd come out then, or when they'd recirculate. But you'd be sitting there watching, Snow White, and you'd hear, with the pins hitting the balls. And
as a bowler, that doesn't seem like the right thing that you would want downstairs of a theater.
Really weird, but it was so fun. It was such a treat to go to the movies. And then we got to go to my parents never had any money, but they would occasionally they would go to a drive-in, and they did not spring for a babysitter. So we were to be in the back of the station wagon sleeping while they watched The Godfather and while they watched Jaws. And there was no way.
It's loud.
I just was not going to lay there and fall asleep, number one, or ignore what was happening. So I watched 90% of The Godfather when I was probably, was probably 8 years old or 9 years old. And my dad would turn around and say, lay down. I know this sounds ridiculous now. No one would ever do that to their child. But to me, it's such a fond memory. And when I was old enough to look back at The Godfather, I thought, wow, I cannot believe I watched that. And Jaws, too. That the scene where they find the head underwater. I mean, and now when you see Jaws, you see how cheesy the effects were. But I'm telling you.
For their time, I don't think they were that
No,
cheesy.
not at all. It scared the crap out of me. I dreamt about that head for weeks afterwards. But, and then, eventually when I was able to drive, the next big movie memory is Rocky Horror Picture Show, because literally my friends in high school and I we went probably 10 or 12 weeks in a row.
Oh, wow.
To the midnight show. And at the time, sometimes we weren't we were probably a little loaded, which was terrible, but I did more drinking in high school than I did since I've been an adult. But anyway, we would go, and
I won't hold it against you.
Thank you. But we would go, and it was bedlam. Did you ever see Rocky Horror? And
I have.
And when you saw it in the theater back then, people were dressed in the characters, and it was nothing for someone to buy a giant soda and whip it across the theater. and all the script that basically went along with it, yelling at the characters, the different things, show us this, do that, it was just a blast.
It's definitely, when you think about cult films, without a doubt, the cult film, because there is, and I didn't even know this until, and I've never seen it at the theater. Now, I have seen a friend of mine did like a the play version of it. Let me rephrase. A friend of mine did the theatrical version of it live.
Yeah.
And so and obviously I went, I never realized how much really like the fans are such a part of it. And so like, I think that that's really interesting now because it's hard to say those types of things are going away because I obviously with Star Wars and even some of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I think that that's sort of bringing that back. But and certainly I think that we'll talk at some point about how the pandemic has changed cinema and film in a general sense. But that's not really what we're here talking about today.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things as we sort of continue moving and pushing it forward. So again, when I was younger, I never really got to the point where I analyzed movies. It was just something fun to do, sort of a way to waste time. And then once I started getting to the point where I could drive, I had a couple friends, and we would almost go to the theater once a week, especially over the summer, when the summer blockbusters would come out. So I remember that. But I also remember at that time getting to the point where I'm almost ready to start, really getting into some of these more adult films. And I remember 14, 15, 16 years old is really when I started getting into, people like Tarantino. So obviously Pulp Fiction came out in 95, if I'm not mistaken, 94, 95. And Reservoir Dogs had already been out, but wasn't really that big of a deal at the time. It wasn't lighting the world on fire at that point.
Yeah.
But it was when Pulp Fiction came out, and I'll never forget, everyone was talking about it, right? And how awesome it was. That was the first time that I ever bought a ticket for another movie because I wasn't old enough to buy a ticket for Pulp Fiction. And it's not like, I always love when these people, Leslie, say, oh, well, I snuck in. There's no sneaking.
I don't see
you
how.
walk in.
Yeah.
Unless it was, I do remember, and the only NC-17 movie that I ever remember even being mainstream enough to be at most theaters was Showgirls. And I do remember when that came out, they had people at the front of the movie theater making sure that the people who were going in are the ones that had tickets. I never remember there ever being, they take your ticket, they say your theater's down here. They're not looking at your tickets. So I realized how easy it was to actually do that. And I do remember buying it. So I don't have my Pulp Fiction ticket stub because I didn't purchase a ticket stub for Pulp Fiction. I don't even remember what I bought, but that was really. And so as we think about favorite films, and again, we already kind of mentioned Tarantino, and we'll talk about him on later podcasts, so I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but just seeing that movie and again, as a 15-year-old,
oh my God,
with very limited exposure, I'm not going to sit here and act like I grew up in a sheltered life.
Right.
So it's not like, oh, this is the first time I ever heard curse words before. But watching that movie was like a shock. Like, this is what film can be.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here watching this crap, these Hollywood blockbuster films that don't amount to anything.
Exactly.
And this is what film can be. And that was the day. And that still, to me, is why Tarantino is still so high on my list.
My God.
Because it was that day that I walked out of that theater like, what just happened?
Yeah.
What did I just watch?
The impact of that's one of the most impactful movies I've ever seen in my life. First off, it's telling a story completely out of order. It's so, you're seeing the end of the movie at the beginning. No, not to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it.
Listen, if you haven't seen Pulp Fiction in 25 years, I don't go watch it or, fast forward through this second.
Yeah. There's a few movies though there's very few movies that have had that impact on me. Plus the graphic violence, and then this concept of laughing at something you really shouldn't really be funny. You get the license to do that when you're watching a movie because it's not really real and you're not hurting anybody by laughing at it. And laughing when, you just shot Leon in the face, or whatever his name was, the young guy.
Gosh, of course you put me on the spot now. I
forget it. But you know what I mean? The two guys are,
Marvin.
They're they're incredulous that happens, and just everything. That movie has more, we use those quotes at home all the time.
So Leslie, for me, that was the big eye opener. What was the big eye opener for you that you remember, or one of them that you remember? Like, now, obviously, you started, you kind of had a little bit different in terms of exposure.
Yeah.
But what was the one that you remember? Like, oh my God, this is different than everything I've ever seen.
Well, it's hard. It's hard not for Pulp Fiction to be one of those. I mean, it certainly had. Silence of the Lambs was another one. I was much older. But I'll tell you, I could not get that one out of my head. Fargo is another one. That one, talk about laughing when you should not be laughing. Jaws, to a certain extent, it really, really got me. It really revved up a part of me that I didn't really know I had. And the Godfather, too. I would say probably the first one was The Godfather.
You're going to hate me. I've never watched any of the Godfather movies.
Oh, my God. Well, don't waste your time on some of the later ones, but the first one and the second one, you really should. Even though it'll be a little dated by the film, by the style of filming and the lighting and everything. You will be gripped. You will be gripped by it.
It's one that's been on my list for a while to watch. But yeah, so don't think any less of me, listeners.
I don't.
Well, not you, but the listeners. I don't want them to think any less of me either.
Yeah.
I will promise you that I will watch that, and maybe we can throw that for a future podcast.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, so another fond memory I have. So that's one of the first fond memories I have, Pulp Fiction. And then another one of the fond memories I have in terms of really eye-opening experiences came when I saw Fight Club.
Oh.
And so I'm 18 because it came out, and I'll never, for whatever reason, I remember, and my memory sometimes gets a little foggy. Like I remember things, but I don't remember like vivid details. I remember the time where I saw it, and very, very, very few films I can remember even what theater I was at. I remember almost the date. I remember when it was, where it was, the time of the movie. Because so I was home from school that weekend. I was visiting my girlfriend at the time. When I was a freshman, I started into my first serious relationship in like June before going to college.
Wow.
And I mean, I Jackie, if you're listening, you can close your ears for a moment. But I mean, I absolutely worship this girl.
Yeah.
And like I said, it was I'd had a couple girlfriends before, but nothing like this. Never felt like this about someone. It's that one that everybody remembers. Mm. And I was coming home almost every weekend. And for whatever reason, I think she was working or something that night. So I called on a friend and said, hey, let's go see Fight Club. And so we went in Mechanicsburg it's now like the Flagship Theater or something.
Yeah.
And we went to like the 7:30 show. And I remember walking in, and it was still light out. It was over I think it was, like I said, early fall, because I'd come home from school. And but it was still light out, when we went into the theater. And then when we came out, it was dark. And it was just like, I honestly, even more so than Pulp Fiction, have never been so unbelievably intrigued and fascinated by a film. It's almost like, when you watch Sixth Sense for the first time, although times like 3,
yeah,
when you realize that, Brad Pitt and Ed Norton are the same person.
Yeah.
And it was just like one of the biggest, but it's not even that. Like Fight Club is so much more involved, because the messaging that comes across it's all about corporate greed.
Yeah.
And when you think about the layers of the movie, I left that movie and I swear I was a changed person.
Yeah.
Because not only was the movie itself so intriguing how they did it with the two people and sort of the split personality, but the message and the theme of the movie, it was honestly the first time that I really genuinely realized as an 18-year-old that movies can be so much more than what is in front of you.
You're right.
And ever since, it's just been like, oh my God, like,
yeah.
I can't believe what I just saw, and they're so right, and why are we letting corporate America push us around, and why don't we stand up for it? And it really, honestly, like, you hear me talk about small businesses all the time.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons why sort of that pushed me down that road. Like, why are we going to these corporate businesses? Why aren't we not that it's like an overtly
sure,
supportive of small businesses, but the whole idea of that. I swear, Leslie, that was the time that when I think about my film background, when I walked out of Fight Club, and I'll never forget, I ended up seeing my girlfriend later that night, and I was like a different person. I was just sort of out of it. She's like, hey, what's wrong with you? I'm like, this movie really has messed with me.
Yeah.
And so that is how I can tell what a good movie is.
Yeah.
If I leave the theater and I am still thinking about it for an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours or 3 weeks,
Yeah.
that's how I can tell. And those are my kind of movies.
Yeah.
You know?
It's a similar thing, but very different at the same time. But the first time I saw Rocky was another thing, because the amount of, my dad made us go see it. I mean, it was crazy because, we had an opportunity to go to the movies, and he said, I'll tell you what you're going to see is Rocky, and you can take your sisters and your brother too. And I was like, ugh. But I didn't want to watch a boxing movie. I didn't care about boxing, but it was so not a boxing movie.
No, it wasn't at all.
And it was this gorgeous story that had so much depth and characters that you really could believe that was an authentic person that was happening to. And I just love watching the way a director, I like watching their vision come through. I didn't even know that's what I was seeing yet. But and the way the actors take on that personality, and I absolutely love comparing an actor's performance in one movie, especially somebody that can really turn on a totally different personality. I love seeing that play out. I love comparing their work. I go crazy over scenery and costumes and the houses, the cars, everything, And Rocky was one of those movies that put you right there, with the practicing pounding on animal flesh and things like that. It was just
drinking eggs.
Yeah, drinking eggs.
Oh my gosh!
And
every time I see that, it's like.
But every time I hear that song when he's running up the steps in Philadelphia, every hair on my body stands up because and then shy, retiring little Adrian becoming like the love of his life just blew me away. I'm like, if those two can make it, anybody can.
Now, have you watched the Creed films?
I have not. I really need
great.
to. I really need
great.
to.
Well, we got a deal. So I'll watch Godfather 1 and 2, and you watch Creed 1 and 2. And that's actually, and again, I don't want to go, we're here talking about how we got into film,
Yeah.
but I got to tell you, like, as a Rocky fan myself personally, which is one of my favorite series of films, Creed is just fantastic.
Good.
Creed 1 and 2, both of them, very good. So here's another memory that I had. So I am a huge Star Wars fan.
Okay.
Huge Star Wars fan. But here's what's interesting. I never, not even once, not even casually, watched them until they were re-released in the late 90s.
Wow.
So if you remember, and maybe if you're not a Star Wars fan, and we won't belabor this point, but they re-released them before the prequels came out. So the 1, 2, and 3, which many Star Wars fans don't particularly care for, although I liked certain parts of them. But before that, they remastered and then even added a few things to the original trilogy and then re-released them. And that was the first experience that I ever had with Star Wars, was in the theater with all of these people who were so excited. And I actually just went with a friend.
Yeah.
Who they're like, yeah, we got to go. I'm like, I've never seen it. They're like, you've never seen Star Wars?
Yeah.
Okay, well, you're going. And I'm just sitting here thinking, what are these idiots doing? They're all dressed up. Come on, this is stupid.
So true.
And I watched it and I said, okay, I get it. And then I promised myself that because they didn't release them all at the same time. I don't remember off the top of my head how they released them, but I think it was like a month apart. And I didn't watch Empire Strikes Back until the theater, and I didn't watch Return of the Jedi to the theater. And that is one thing that I look back at now. And what's even more interesting, Leslie, is my son, it loves anything loud and crashing and things like that.
That's wonderful.
But so what we've done is we make it a tradition to see any new movie that's playing at the IMAX theater. So we go down to, there's an IMAX theater in York.
Yeah.
It's actually a IMAX 3D theater. So you got to be careful when there's a big difference between 3D and IMAX 3D. And to my knowledge, it is the closest to us personally here in Harrisburg area, the closest IMAX 3D theater. And they only have one theater that's IMAX 3D. But all your Star Wars, all your Jurassic Parks, all those big, loud, crashy movies are there. And, of course, we got to see Tenet down there, which is really cool, which we'll talk about that on a future show.
Well, I think that's so great that your son loves that. And my son and I also bond over movies because just like we're doing right now, there's so few people that want to like obsess about something they saw in a movie, that they want to just tear that movie apart and really get into it. And to your point about Star Wars, again, another genre that I didn't want to care about. And I'll be honest and say I've only seen the first three. But I didn't want to like them, and I loved them. But I haven't watched any of the new stuff. It's the same with like Indiana Jones too. That you cannot get over how entertaining those movies are.
Again, there's two schools. I don't want to do a Star Wars podcast here, but there's two schools of thought here. I like the movies for what they are, but there's a lot of fans who just didn't like the newer ones. They didn't like the prequels, and it's almost like, well, nothing can stand up to the original. I would also say that The Mandalorian is really cool. I actually think that you would like that. It's definitely Star Wars, but it's got a much different vibe than some of the original films. So you said you had Disney Plus, so maybe worth a shot.
I need a story. That's the key thing is I need a story.
Yeah, there definitely is.
Yeah.
So I want to maybe kind of think about some other memories. So again, I talked about having the opportunity to go with my son to see some of these really cool movies. And I want to come back to sort of the final memory, and then I want you to maybe talk about some other memories that you have that I want to talk about here today. And one of those is the first time that I saw The Dark Knight. I am not by any means a superhero genre fan. And again, for all you listeners out there who want to begrudge me for another thing, I have never seen any of the Marvel Cinematic Universe films.
Me neither.
I will say, let me walk that back just a bit. I did see Iron Man 1 and Iron Man 2, and I did enjoy those. But I have never seen any of the Avengers movies. I've never seen any of the Thor movies or the Captain America movies. It's just not exciting to me. And even Superman, I'm not a big fan of. Now, I do like Spider-Man, and Hunter likes Spider-Man too.
Yeah,
so
that's cute.
We do go see them. But when I saw Batman, The Dark Knight, that was, and I didn't even know this, right? I wasn't really into Christopher Nolan at the time. I had seen Memento. I knew about Memento before he did any other films.
Right.
But it never really occurred to me. I wasn't at that point in my life where I started looking critically at directors. Like, I knew Tarantino, but beyond that, there was never any other director that was like, okay, well, I like this movie and he directed it, so I'm going to go see it because of the director. Movies are such star-driven, not necessarily director-driven, unless, of course, it's a Tarantino or a Nolan later in their career. Right. And I went to see that, and I was just shocked.
Yeah.
Because it was unlike, now obviously, maybe we've seen old Superman movies or we've seen the original Spider-Man series. This was so much different than anything I'd ever seen. And then, of course, I went back and then watched Batman Begins, which was the first one, which a lot of people don't even realize.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Dark Knight Rises was awesome too. But that was another moment in my life that I remembered, like, oh my gosh, like, this is so much different than anything and everything I've ever seen, certainly in this genre. And again, still not a superhero fan,
right?
But I love that trilogy.
Yeah, that's those are the ones that stand out for me too. My daughter drugged me to see Wonder Woman too, but she loved it because it was and that's not Marvel either, is it?
No, that's DC.
I don't know anything about those, but she liked it because it was a woman. She really wanted to see a woman superhero, and it was entertaining. There's no doubt. But the Dark Knight, the the true darkness of that, the true, you just didn't expect it to be such a, I actually lied because I have seen the earlier Batman ones, the Michael Keaton.
Sure, and I remember watching those too.
And they're fun and silly, and they're certainly entertaining, and they're kind of eye candy, I call them, because there's a lot to look at there. But this is not what you're getting with The Dark Knight, and I agree. It's got so much more happening. I liked it too.
And it's interesting, obviously Heath Ledger playing the Joker.
Yeah.
is such a memorable, and again, it's a little bit more memorable because of how his life ended. But even before all of that, it was still. I mean, he was going to be nominated for that award regardless of what ended up happening with his life. And it is so interesting because I've known of Heath Ledger through other movies, and this was so much different. Yeah. I'm actually surprised that he got cast into this particular role because it just seems so much different than everything else. Yeah. And obviously, he put himself in the position for that character,
right?
And unfortunately, it caused his life to end.
I've done some research on it too, and it was a devastating character for him to play. I had seen him in Brokeback Mountain, which another movie that changed my life too. Movies like that made me realize that you really are entitled to love whoever you love. Nobody can decide that for you. And anyway, I don't want to get us too far off the path, but that's another earth-shattering movie for me too. But I can't imagine the effect that playing such a dark character would have on somebody that was emotionally a little bit fragile in the first place.
Absolutely. Well, I kind of want to sort of flash forward to, again, a more recent film, which I don't want to take a long time to talk about, but I want to at least address, and it's Tenet.
Yes.
And this was a film that obviously, for a lot of reasons, is still sort of in the headlines. And it mainly is because this was the film that was supposed to save Hollywood and save this cinema from the pandemic. And unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, again, which maybe we talk about it in another show. Sorry, I'm just going to note this.
Yeah.
First of all, I didn't think at the time that people were ready.
Right.
And we actually went quote-unquote opening weekend. And when I say opening weekend, what I mean is the first time that we were actually able to go to a movie in Pennsylvania.
Right.
And we went, and again, that's the one big thing that my wife and I, there are very few movies that she loves the romantic comedies, and it's just not for me. Like, I can't do it. And there have been times, like I remember going to see Sex and the City in the movies with her, and they were fine. Like, it's just nothing to write home about.
Yeah.
And so we went to see Tenet, and first of all, they totally redid the IMAX 3D theater. Now it's all these huge leather recliners, and I don't know about you, but I've managed to fall asleep at a movie a time or two.
Chariots of Fire, snooze fest for me back then.
And I'm almost ashamed to say that I'm almost afraid to go to these theaters because I'm afraid I'm going to get too comfortable and fall asleep. And you're paying now $15, $20 to go to the movies. But so Tenet has been one of these movies that, gosh, not only did I go home immediately and watch 5 different videos. Screen Rant does a lot of really good stuff analyzing movies, because I watched it and I understood what was going on, but there was so much going on that without a little bit more explanation, you kind of weren't able to fully follow what was going on. And so this movie has had a pretty big impact on me just over the past 6 to 8 months, because I keep learning new things. And so much so, Leslie, that was one of the things I'd asked for Christmas and I didn't get. So I bought it.
Good.
And as soon as I got it, I watched it. I couldn't sleep that night because I was still trying to piece things together. Here's what I want to talk about this, though. So I loved it. It got generally decent reviews.
I liked it very much.
Here's the problem. In general, number one, it didn't perform box office wise because obviously people either couldn't go to the movies or didn't feel comfortable going
Right.
to the movies. But Chris Nolan was so adamant that it be released in the theaters.
Right.
Now, listen, I'm not going to cry for Warner Brothers.
Right.
You know, they're fine. And
They're going to make it. Yeah.
And even internationally, the movie did end up at least breaking even.
Yeah.
So, and then with video on demand and whatever. So I don't feel sorry for them. If anyone, I feel sorry for Nolan.
Yeah.
Because this was a passion project of his, and he put so much into it. And again, on a future podcast, I want to talk about why I think Nolan and Tarantino are sort of in a class of their own
Right.
because they also write their own films.
Yes.
But in terms of Tenet, the reason that to me I don't think it's ever going to get its fair shake is because I think that for many people, they don't understand it. They thought it was too overly complicated and didn't want to take the time to dig in beyond
Right.
the theater. A lot of people want to just go to the theater, be entertained for 2.5 hours, watch some things blow up, and then they leave with a smile on their face. I don't particularly care for that, and unfortunately, Leslie, I think we're in the minority here.
Well-
And you can kind of tell that with the success of these Marvel films.
I know. And the thing is, like I said, obsessing about movies. But for me, movies, I wrote a couple notes here just because I didn't want to forget to talk about this. Movies really help us to relate and empathize with other people. And I think I've become better at my job, better at my family relationships and things because I've seen movies where something so very subtle or very serious happens, and what happens to a person. I mean, and I think that visual learning, that actually seeing the feelings. I mean, I can read a book and I can imagine things in a book, and I can admit this is a great book, but for some reason, seeing it happen is just key for my really thorough enjoyment of it. And I think that movies give us the chance to understand things that we would never experience. You know, two guys fall in love, you know, on a mountain tending sheep. You know, everybody probably thinks they just go up there and, you know, do their job and that's it. But that was a chance for them to get together alone. You know, it's all those kind of things. The movie Moonlight is another one. Changed my whole life. Changed my entire life. You know, again, I would not have had those experiences if I hadn't seen them through a director's eyes.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a good place to call our first episode. So you got to learn a little bit more about our sort of journey into film, how we got to this point, and how we learned more about film and how it's helped to sort of relate to our lives. So this is really kind of just a preview of future episodes and some of the topics that we want to talk about. Again, future episodes, we're looking at maybe how the pandemic impacted the film industry. Obviously, we're going to talk about Christopher Nolan, Quentin Tarantino. We're going to talk a little bit more about documentary film, doing some guilty pleasures, and even maybe take a look at some horror films. So
Yes.
Those are some things that we have coming up over the next, let's say, 6 to 8 months.
Yeah.
And we're really looking forward to doing this, and we hope you enjoy it. So please let us know what you think about this episode. And Leslie, as always, it's a pleasure to have you on, and I look forward to doing this with you.
Thank you. I loved the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Of course. All right, so that's going to do it for our very first episode for A Night at the Movies. We will see you again next month, where we'll talk about our favorite films. We'll see you then.